The sun was setting over the military base in Djibouti, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Captain Zara Williams adjusted her uniform one last time before walking toward the officers' club. Her flight suit had been replaced with her dress uniform, complete with pilot wings gleaming on her chest and captain's bars on her shoulders. She had earned every piece of metal on that uniform through years of hard work and dedication. Tonight was supposed to be special. The base was hosting a welcome dinner for new officers, and Zara was looking forward to meeting some of the pilots she would be working with over the next few months. She had just transferred to this international base, bringing with her an impressive record as one of the top Rafale fighter jet pilots in the French Air Force. As she approached the entrance of the officers' club, she could hear laughter and conversation flowing from inside. Other military personnel were entering freely, showing their identification cards with casual waves to the security guard at the door. Zara reached for her own military ID, ready to join her colleagues for what she hoped would be a good evening. But when she reached the entrance, something unexpected happened. The security guard, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a stern expression, stepped directly in front of her. He looked her up and down with obvious suspicion, his eyes lingering on her uniform as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice carrying a tone that immediately put Zara on edge. "This establishment is for military personnel only. You'll need to find somewhere else to go." Zara blinked, certain she had misheard. She gestured to her uniform, pointing to the obvious insignia and rank markers.
"I am military personnel," she said calmly.
"I'm Captain Williams, and I'm here for the officers' dinner." The guard shook his head, crossing his arms over his chest. "Look, I don't know where you got that costume, but you need to take it off and leave. This is a serious military facility, and we don't allow people to play dress-up here." The words hit Zara like a physical blow. Around them, other officers continued to enter the club without any questions. A group of pilots she recognized from the flight line walked past, their conversations barely pausing as they flashed their IDs and disappeared inside. None of them seemed to notice what was happening at the entrance. "This isn't a costume," Zara said, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her chest. "I'm a fighter pilot with the French Air Force. Here's my military identification." She held out her ID card, which clearly showed her name, rank, and position. The guard barely glanced at the card. "Anyone can fake these things," he said dismissively. "I've been working security here for 15 years, and I know what military officers look like. You don't fit the profile." Zara felt her heart racing, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had faced challenges before, but nothing quite like this. "What exactly do you mean by that?" she asked. "I mean, you're obviously not military material," the guard replied, his voice getting louder. "Real pilots don't look like you. Now I'm going to ask you one more time to remove that uniform and leave the premises before I have to call for backup." By now, the commotion was starting to attract attention. A few officers who were entering the club slowed down to watch what was happening. Zara recognized some of them as pilots from her own squadron, people she had been working with for the past few weeks. Surely they would step in and clarify the situation, but they didn't. They stood there looking uncomfortable, exchanging glances with each other but saying nothing. One of them, Lieutenant Rodriguez, whom she had flown training missions with just days before, actually looked away when their eyes met. The situation grew worse when the club manager appeared. He was a thin man in an expensive suit who carried himself with the air of someone used to being in charge. "What's the problem here?" he asked, looking between Zara and the security guard. "This woman is trying to enter the club wearing a fake military uniform," the guard explained. "I've told her to leave, but she's being difficult." The manager looked Zara up and down with the same suspicious expression as the guard. "This is highly inappropriate," he said. "Our club maintains the highest standards, and we cannot allow people to mock the military by wearing unauthorized uniforms. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately, or we'll be forced to call the military police." Zara couldn't believe what she was hearing. She tried once more to explain who she was, showing both her military ID and her pilot's license. She mentioned specific details about the base, her squadron, and recent training exercises that only someone with legitimate access would know, but neither man would listen. The manager even suggested that she might have stolen the information from a real pilot. The accusation was so absurd that Zara almost laughed, but the situation was far too serious for humor. "I want to speak to Colonel Peterson," Zara said, naming her commanding officer. "He can verify my identity and position." "The colonel is inside enjoying his dinner," the manager replied. "And he won't be disturbed by someone playing games. Now, are you going to leave voluntarily, or do we need to escort you out?" Zara looked around at the group of officers who had gathered to watch the spectacle. Some of them were people she had served with, people who knew exactly who she was, but they all remained silent, their faces showing a mixture of embarrassment and discomfort, but no one willing to speak up on her behalf. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just about one ignorant security guard or an overzealous manager. This was about something much deeper, something that she had hoped she had left behind when she reached this level in her career. "Fine," Zara said quietly, her voice controlled despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "I'll leave." She turned away from the entrance, walking slowly back toward the parking area. Behind her, she could hear the normal sounds of the club resuming, as people went back to their conversations and their dinner. It was as if nothing had happened, as if she had never been there at all. As she reached her car, she heard footsteps behind her. Lieutenant Rodriguez and 2 other pilots from her squadron had followed her out. "Captain Williams," Rodriguez said, his voice uncertain, "we're really sorry about what happened in there. That guard and the manager, they don't represent how everyone feels." "Really?" Zara asked, turning to face them. "Because from where I was standing, it looked like everyone was perfectly comfortable watching it happen." "It's just complicated," another pilot said. "If we had caused a scene, it might have made things worse for you." "Worse?" Zara repeated. "How exactly could it have been worse? I was accused of stealing military property and impersonating an officer. I was humiliated in front of my colleagues. What part of that could have been worse?" The pilots looked at each other uncomfortably. "Look, not everyone thinks the way those guys do," Rodriguez said. "Most of us respect your skills and your service record. You're one of the best pilots we have. But not good enough to deserve basic respect," Zara said. "Not good enough for any of you to speak up when I was being treated like a criminal." She got into her car, leaving the 3 pilots standing in the parking lot. As she drove away from the officers' club, Zara felt a familiar mixture of anger and disappointment that she had hoped she would never experience again. She had worked so hard to reach this point in her career, to prove herself as a pilot and an officer, but apparently some people would never see past the color of her skin to recognize her achievements. The incident at the club wasn't just an isolated event. It was a reminder that despite all her accomplishments, despite her skills and dedication, there would always be people who questioned whether she belonged in uniform. Tonight had shown her that even among her fellow officers, people she trusted with her life during flights, she couldn't count on support when it really mattered. But as Zara drove back to her quarters, something else began to build alongside her anger, a determination that she had felt many times before, the same drive that had gotten her through flight school and earned her wings. If some people couldn't see her worth, maybe it was time to make it impossible for them to ignore. The weeks following the incident at the officers' club passed slowly for Captain Zara Williams. She had hoped that maybe it was just a one-time thing, a misunderstanding that wouldn't happen again. But as the days went by, she began to notice a pattern that made her stomach sink with each new realization. It started small. During morning briefings, when Zara would suggest tactical approaches or point out potential issues with flight plans, her comments seemed to fall into a void. The briefing officers would nod politely, then continue as if she hadn't spoken at all. But when Lieutenant Rodriguez or Captain Thompson made similar suggestions just minutes later, suddenly those ideas were worth discussing in detail. At first, Zara told herself she was being too sensitive. Maybe her suggestions weren't as clear as she thought, or maybe the timing was off. But when the exact same tactical approach she had recommended was later praised as innovative thinking when Thompson presented it as his own idea, she knew something was wrong. The equipment issues started next. As a pilot, Zara needed specific gear for different types of missions. Her flight helmet required regular maintenance. Her survival equipment needed updates, and her flight suit needed proper cleaning after each training exercise. These were routine requests that every pilot made regularly, but somehow Zara's requisition forms kept getting lost. When she submitted requests for helmet maintenance, they would disappear from the system. When she asked about replacement parts for her survival radio, She was told there was a backlog that might take weeks to clear. Meanwhile, other pilots in her squadron were getting their equipment requests processed within days. Master Sergeant Collins, who managed the equipment depot, always had a reasonable explanation. "The computer system has been acting up," he would say, or "we're waiting for parts to come in from headquarters." But Zara noticed that these delays only seemed to affect her requests. The most frustrating part was how subtle it all was. Nobody was openly hostile or obviously discriminatory. They were all perfectly polite, professionally courteous, and completely unhelpful. It was like being slowly strangled by bureaucracy and indifference. Then came the flight evaluations. As a pilot, Zara was constantly being assessed on her performance. Every training mission, every exercise, every simulation was recorded and reviewed. She knew her numbers were excellent. Her flying was precise, her decision-making was quick and accurate, and her safety record was perfect. But when her written evaluations came back, they told a different story. Her technical skills were rated as satisfactory instead of excellent. Her leadership potential was marked as needs development. Most puzzling of all, her team integration scores were consistently low. The comments section was filled with vague criticisms that were impossible to address. Shows signs of difficulty adapting to unit culture. May benefit from improved communication with fellow officers. Attitude. Requires attention for optimal performance. Zara read these evaluations with growing frustration. How could her attitude be a problem when she had never received any direct feedback about it? How could her communication be poor when she participated actively in every briefing and training session? And what exactly did difficulty adapting to unit culture even mean? She tried to get clarification from her direct supervisor, Major Phillips. He was a career officer with 20 years of experience, someone who had always seemed fair and professional in their interactions. "Major, I'm confused about some of the comments in my evaluation," Zara said during a scheduled meeting. "Could you give me specific examples of areas where I need to improve?" Phillips shifted uncomfortably in his chair, looking at the papers on his desk rather than meeting her eyes. "Well, Captain Williams, these evaluations are based on input from multiple sources. The important thing is that you're meeting minimum standards." "But I'd like to exceed minimum standards," Zara pressed. "If there are specific behaviors or actions I need to change, I want to know what they are so I can work on them." "It's not about specific actions," Phillips said vaguely. "It's more about fitting in with the team dynamic, maybe being less assertive in group settings." Zara felt her jaw tighten. "Are you telling me to speak up less during briefings? To be less involved in mission planning? I'm just suggesting that you might want to observe how others interact before jumping in with your own ideas," Phillips replied. "Sometimes it's better to follow before trying to lead." The conversation left Zara feeling more frustrated than ever. She was being criticized for doing exactly what military training had taught her to do: be engaged, think critically, and contribute to mission success. But apparently those qualities were only valued when they came from certain types of officers. The breaking point came during a joint training exercise with visiting military units from several allied countries. It was a major event, with high-ranking officers from different nations observing the proceedings. Zara was excited about the opportunity to demonstrate her skills on an international stage. The visiting delegation included Colonel Harrison, a British officer with a reputation for being outspoken about military standards. During the preliminary briefing, he made his opinions clear to everyone in the room. "I hope we're going to see some real flying today," Harrison announced, his voice carrying clearly across the briefing room. "Not some politically correct demonstration designed to check diversity boxes. When lives are on the line, we need the best pilots in the cockpit, not social experiments." His eyes swept across the room as he spoke, and Zara felt them linger on her for just a moment longer than necessary. The message was clear, even if he never mentioned her by name. In his view, her presence in the squadron was about politics, not ability. Major Phillips, who was leading the briefing, said nothing to challenge Harrison's comments. Neither did any of the other senior officers present. The visiting colonel's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning the atmosphere for everyone who heard them. Zara sat perfectly still, her training taking over to keep her expression neutral and professional. But inside she felt something break. All the small slights, all the subtle discrimination, all the careful politeness that masked obvious prejudice suddenly crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. After the briefing, as officers filed out to prepare for the training exercise, Zara overheard Phillips talking quietly with Colonel Harrison. "Don't worry about the diversity issues," Phillips was saying. "We might be required to include certain personnel, but we can always adjust assignments to minimize any impact on mission effectiveness." "Good to hear," Harrison replied. "The last thing we need is someone getting in over their head and creating problems for the real pilots." Zara walked past them without acknowledging what she had heard, but their words burned in her memory. She was a diversity issue. She was someone who needed to be managed and minimized rather than utilized effectively. Despite her training, her skills, and her dedication, she would always be seen as a liability rather than an asset. That evening, Zara sat alone in her quarters thinking about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. She thought about the security guard who had refused to believe she was a real officer. She thought about the equipment delays that seemed to target only her. She thought about the evaluation comments that criticized her for qualities that would be praised in others. Most of all, she thought about the silence. The silence of colleagues who watched discrimination happen and said nothing. The silence of supervisors who let prejudiced comments pass without challenge. The silence of a system that claimed to value merit while systematically undermining those who didn't fit a certain profile. But as Zara sat there in the quiet of her room, she realized that she was tired of being silent too. She had spent her career trying to prove herself by being twice as good, twice as professional, twice as dedicated as everyone else. She had followed all the rules, exceeded all the standards, and maintained perfect behavior even when others failed to do the same. And where had it gotten her? She was still being questioned, still being undermined, still being treated as if her presence was a favor rather than an earned right. It was time for a different approach. Zara had always believed that action spoke louder than words, and she was about to prove that point in a way that no one could ignore or explain away. Tomorrow's training exercise was going to include a demonstration flight for the visiting dignitaries, and she was scheduled to participate. But this wouldn't be just another routine training mission. This was going to be her chance to show everyone exactly what a diversity hire could do when given the opportunity to shine. She was going to make it impossible for anyone to question whether she belonged in that cockpit. The time for being patient and hoping for change was over. If they wouldn't listen to her words, maybe they would finally pay attention to her actions. Captain Zara Williams woke up before dawn, her mind already focused on what she needed to accomplish. The previous night's conversation between Major Phillips and Colonel Harrison played over and over in her head. But instead of anger, she felt something more powerful. Absolute determination. She dressed carefully in her flight suit, checking every detail twice. Today's training exercise would include a demonstration flight for visiting military dignitaries, and she was one of 3 pilots selected to showcase the capabilities of the Rafale fighter jets. It was supposed to be a routine display of military precision and technology, but Zara had something different in mind. She made her way to the operations center while most of the base was still asleep. The early morning hours were when she did her best thinking, and she needed to review every detail of today's mission parameters. The demonstration flight was scheduled to begin at 1400 hours, with a specific route that would take the aircraft over designated viewing areas where the visiting officials would be stationed. As she studied the flight plans and airspace restrictions, Zara noticed something interesting. The timing of the demonstration coincided perfectly with a reception being held at the officers' club for the visiting dignitaries. The reception would include outdoor activities at a temporary site, set up adjacent to the club, where guests could enjoy refreshments while discussing military cooperation between allied nations. The same officers' club, where she had been humiliated weeks earlier. The same place where security guards and managers had insisted she didn't belong in uniform. The same location where her fellow officers had stood by and watched without saying a word in her defense. Zara felt a smile forming as she realized the opportunity that was presenting itself. The demonstration flight route could be easily modified within acceptable parameters to include a pass over the reception area. Such modifications were common and usually encouraged, as they allowed visiting officials to see military aircraft up close and appreciate their capabilities. She pulled up the detailed charts showing airspace restrictions and altitude requirements. The area around the officers' club was well within approved flying zones, with no special restrictions that would prevent a carefully planned flyover. As long as she maintained proper altitude and speed, such a demonstration would be completely within regulations. But this wouldn't be just any flyover. Zara began planning something that would showcase not only the Rafale's capabilities, but also the skill of its pilot. She wanted to create a display of precision flying that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. Her first stop was the weather office, where she reviewed detailed forecasts for the afternoon. Wind patterns, visibility, and atmospheric conditions would all affect her ability to execute the maneuvers she was planning. The forecast looked perfect. Clear skies, light winds, and excellent visibility. Next, she visited the maintenance hangar where her aircraft was being prepared for the day's missions. Chief Petty Officer Martinez was already there, running through the pre-flight checklist with his usual attention to detail. "Morning, Captain," Martinez said, looking up from the engine inspection. "She's in perfect condition for today's demonstration. All systems checked and double-checked." "Excellent," Zara replied, running her hand along the aircraft's wing. "I want to make sure we give our guests a memorable demonstration of what this machine can do." Martinez nodded enthusiastically. "This bird's capable of some incredible maneuvers in the right hands. I've seen what you can do with her, Captain. Those dignitaries are in for quite a show." Zara spent the next hour going through every system on the aircraft, checking controls and reviewing emergency procedures. She had flown this particular Rafale dozens of times, but today she wanted to be absolutely certain of every switch, every gauge, every response characteristic. As other personnel began arriving for the day shift, Zara made her way to the flight planning office. She needed to submit a formal modification to her demonstration route, and she wanted to make sure all the paperwork was properly filed and approved. The duty officer was Lieutenant Morrison, someone Zara had worked with on several previous missions. He was known for being thorough but reasonable when it came to flight plan modifications. "I'd like to request a minor route adjustment for today's demonstration," Zara said, presenting her paperwork. "I want to include a low-altitude pass over the reception area so the visiting officials can get a close look at the aircraft." Morrison reviewed the proposed changes, checking them against airspace restrictions and safety protocols. "Altitude looks good. Timing works with the schedule, and it's well within approved zones," he said, stamping the documents. "Should make for an impressive display. The brass always likes it when they can see the hardware up close." "That's exactly what I'm hoping for," Zara replied, taking back her approved flight plan. With the official paperwork completed, Zara spent the rest of the morning in the flight simulator. She practiced the specific maneuvers she planned to execute, running through them over and over until every movement was perfectly programmed into her muscle memory. The simulator allowed her to practice flying at the exact altitude and speed she would use during the actual demonstration. She rehearsed barrel rolls, climbing turns, and precision formation flying until she could execute each maneuver with absolute confidence. As she worked through the simulations, other pilots began arriving for their own training sessions. Some of them watched her practice, commenting on the complexity of the maneuvers she was rehearsing. "Planning something special for the demonstration?" asked Captain Thompson, the pilot who had been credited with her tactical suggestions during briefings. "Just want to make sure I represent the squadron well," Zara replied, not taking her eyes off the simulator controls. "Today's demonstration is important for international relations." "Well, you're certainly putting in the effort," Thompson said. "I'm sure it'll be fine." The casual dismissal in his tone was exactly what Zara had expected. To Thompson and others like him, she was just another pilot going through the motions. They had no idea what she was truly capable of, because they had never bothered to pay attention. That was about to change. After completing her simulator sessions, Zara visited the base library to research the backgrounds of the visiting dignitaries who would be watching today's demonstration. She wanted to understand who would be in the audience, what their military experience was, and what would impress them most. Colonel Harrison, the British officer who had made the comments about diversity hires, had an extensive background in aviation. He had been a fighter pilot himself before moving into administrative roles. He would definitely recognize exceptional flying when he saw it. The other visiting officials included Air Force commanders from Germany, Canada, and Italy, all with significant experience in military aviation. These weren't politicians or civilians who could be fooled by flashy but meaningless aerobatics. They were professionals who would appreciate genuine skill and precision. Perfect. Zara wanted an audience that would understand exactly what they were seeing. As the afternoon approached, she made her final preparations. She reviewed her flight plan one more time, checking weather updates and confirming that all her equipment was ready. She went through her personal pre-flight routine, the same series of mental and physical preparations she had performed before every important mission of her career. But this mission felt different. For the first time in weeks, Zara felt completely in control of her situation. Instead of reacting to other people's prejudices and limitations, she was about to proactively demonstrate her capabilities in a way that would be impossible to ignore or explain away. She thought about all the small humiliations and subtle discouragements she had endured since arriving at this base. The security guard who had insisted her uniform was a costume. The equipment delays that had targeted only her requests. The evaluation comments that criticized her for being too assertive. The fellow officers who had watched her be humiliated and said nothing. Most of all, she thought about Colonel Harrison's comments about diversity hires and social experiments. He had made it clear that he believed her presence in the squadron was about politics rather than merit. He had suggested that real pilots shouldn't have to accommodate people like her. In just a few hours, Zara was going to show him and everyone else exactly what a so-called diversity hire could accomplish when given the opportunity to demonstrate her skills without interference or excuses. She had spent her entire career proving herself to people who questioned whether she belonged. But today, she wasn't going to prove anything to anyone. Today, she was simply going to show them who she was and what she could do. The afternoon sun was climbing toward its peak position as Zara made her way to the flight line for final preparations. In a few hours, she would be sitting in the cockpit of a Rafale fighter jet, ready to deliver a demonstration that no one in attendance would ever forget. She had been told to take off her uniform, questioned about her qualifications, and treated as if her presence was a burden rather than an asset. But very soon she would be the one in control, flying overhead while others looked up from the ground. Some lessons, Zara reflected, were best taught from 30,000 feet. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as military officials and dignitaries gathered at the outdoor reception area adjacent to the officers' club. Tables laden with refreshments had been arranged under white canvas tents, while small groups of officers mingled and discussed matters of international military cooperation. Colonel Harrison stood near the center of the gathering, his British uniform crisp despite the African heat. He was deep in conversation with Major Phillips and several other senior officers, their discussion occasionally punctuated by confident laughter. The same security guard who had confronted Captain Zara Williams weeks earlier moved among the guests, ensuring everyone had drinks and that the service ran smoothly. The club manager, dressed in his finest suit, made his rounds among the visiting officials, proudly explaining the high standards maintained at his establishment and the quality of service they provided to the military community. He gestured expansively as he spoke, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight with such distinguished guests. Meanwhile, 3 miles away at the flight line, Captain Zara Williams was completing her final pre-flight checks. Her Rafale fighter jet sat gleaming in the afternoon sun, every surface polished to perfection by Chief Petty Officer Martinez and his maintenance crew. "She's ready for anything you want to throw at her." "Captain," Martinez said, handing Zara her helmet. "All systems are green across the board." Zara nodded, pulling on her helmet and connecting the communication systems. The familiar weight and feel of her flight gear always had a calming effect, reminding her of thousands of hours of training and experience that had brought her to this moment. "Tower, this is Falcon 1 requesting clearance for demonstration flight," she ASP. "Okay," into her microphone as she settled into the cockpit. "Falcon 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Weather conditions are optimal. Winds light from the southwest. Have a good flight, Captain." The Rafale's twin engines roared to life with a sound that never failed to send a thrill through Zara's chest. This was where she belonged, where all the politics and prejudice fell away and only skill and performance mattered. In the cockpit of a fighter jet, there was no room for anything but excellence. She taxied to the runway, going through her final systems checks as she had done hundreds of times before. But today felt different. Today she wasn't just flying a routine training mission or participating in a standard exercise. Today she was going to make a statement that no one could misinterpret or ignore. "Falcon 1, you are cleared for takeoff," came the voice from air traffic control. Zara pushed the throttles forward, feeling the familiar surge of acceleration as the Rafale gathered speed down the runway. The moment of liftoff was always magical, that instant when the aircraft left the ground and entered the realm where she felt most at home. As she climbed to her assigned altitude, Zara reviewed her flight plan one final time. The demonstration was scheduled to begin with standard maneuvers over the designated viewing area, where official observers and military personnel were stationed with binoculars and evaluation equipment. These were the people who would provide formal assessments of aircraft capabilities and pilot performance. But Zara's real audience was 3 miles away, enjoying their reception at the officers' club. Falcon 1, you are approaching the demonstration zone, the air traffic controller informed her. Weather remains optimal and observers are in position. Roger, control. Beginning demonstration sequence now. Zara started with the prescribed maneuvers, executing perfect barrel rolls and climbing turns that showcased both the Rafale's capabilities and her own precision as a pilot. Through her radio, she could hear the appreciative comments from the official observers on the ground. Excellent control demonstrated, came one voice. Textbook execution of all maneuvers. Outstanding pilot performance, added another. This is exactly the kind of precision we like to see. But these standard compliments weren't what Zara was after. She had spent her career earning praise from official evaluators and training supervisors. What she wanted was something different, something that would reach the people who questioned her right to wear the uniform in the first place. After completing the required demonstration sequence, Zara keyed her radio to request a modification to her flight path. Control, Falcon 1 requesting permission for additional demonstration over the reception area. I have authorization for low-altitude flyover as per filed flight plan modification. Permission granted, Falcon 1. You are cleared for flyover of Officers Club reception area. Maintain minimum altitude of 1,000 feet and exercise standard safety protocols. Roger, control. Proceeding to reception area now. Zara banked the Rafale toward the Officers Club, her heart rate increasing with anticipation. Through her aircraft's advanced navigation systems, she could see the exact location of the reception, the white tents and gathering of people clearly visible from her altitude. She began her approach from the east, the sun behind her as she lined up for the perfect angle of attack. This wouldn't be just a simple flyover. She was going to execute a series of maneuvers that would demonstrate precision, power, and absolute mastery of her aircraft. As she approached the reception area, conversations on the ground gradually died away. The distinctive sound of jet engines approaching at high speed had a way of commanding attention, and people began looking up to see what was happening. Colonel Harrison was in the middle of explaining to a German Air Force commander-wide diversity initiatives were undermining military effectiveness when the sound reached them. As I was saying, when you prioritize social goals over military readiness, you inevitably compromise operational. His voice trailed off as the roar of approaching engines grew louder. Is that part of the demonstration? Asked the German officer, shading his eyes as he looked toward the approaching aircraft. Major Phillips checked his watch and frowned. I thought the demonstration was scheduled for the other viewing area, he said, but his voice was already being drowned out by the approaching Rafale. At exactly 1,000 feet altitude, Zara arrived over the reception area at precisely the moment she had calculated for maximum impact. But instead of simply flying overhead, she executed a perfect barrel roll directly above the gathering, the Rafale's form clearly visible against the blue sky as it completed a full rotation around its longitudinal axis. The maneuver was flawless, demonstrating the kind of precision that only came from years of training and natural talent. As she completed the roll, Zara pulled into a climbing turn that showcased the aircraft's power and responsiveness, the engine's roar echoing off the buildings below. Every conversation at the reception had stopped. Military officers, dignitaries, and support staff all stood with their faces turned skyward, watching the display of aeronautical skill taking place directly overhead. Several of the visiting officials were pointing and commenting excitedly to their colleagues. Magnificent flying, the German commander said, his voice filled with professional appreciation. Whoever is piloting that aircraft knows exactly what they're doing. Colonel Harrison said nothing, but his expression had changed from casual confidence to something approaching surprise. As someone with extensive aviation experience, he recognized exceptional piloting when he saw it. Zara wasn't finished. She brought the Rafale around for a second pass, this time executing a series of precision turns that created a perfect figure-8 pattern in the sky above the reception. The maneuver required exact timing and spatial awareness, as any miscalculation would disrupt the geometric precision of the display. On the ground, the security guard who had refused to believe Zara was a real military officer stood frozen with a drink tray in his hands, staring up at the aerial demonstration. The club manager had stopped his conversation with visiting dignitaries mid-sentence, his mouth slightly open as he watched the Rafale perform maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. Control. Falcon 1 requesting permission for final demonstration pass, Zara radioed. Permission granted. Falcon 1, you are cleared for final approach. For her closing maneuver, Zara executed what pilots called a knife-edge pass, flying with the aircraft rotated 90 degrees so that it appeared to cut through the sky sideways. The maneuver required incredible skill and confidence, as it left no margin for error and demanded perfect control of the aircraft in an unnatural attitude. The Rafale swept over the reception area one final time, its profile clearly visible to everyone below as Zara maintained perfect control throughout the knife-edge pass. As she completed the maneuver and returned to normal flight attitude, she could see people on the ground applauding and gesturing excitedly. Outstanding demonstration. Falcon 1, came the voice from air traffic control. Return to base when ready. Roger, control. Falcon 1 returning to base. As Zara flew back toward the airfield, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Through her radio, she could hear excited chatter from the official observers who had witnessed parts of her display. Did you see those maneuvers over the reception area? One voice was saying. That was some of the finest precision flying I've ever witnessed. Agreed, came another voice. Whoever was piloting that aircraft demonstrated exceptional skill and control. That kind of precision doesn't come from standard training. But the real confirmation of her success came from a different source. As she approached the airfield for landing, Zara's radio crackled with a transmission from the reception area. Air traffic control. This is Colonel Harrison at the Officers Club reception. Could you please identify the pilot of the aircraft that just performed the demonstration over our location? Several of us would like to meet whoever delivered such an outstanding display of flying skill. Zara smiled inside her helmet as she heard the request. The same officer who had questioned whether diversity hires belonged in military aviation was now specifically asking to meet the pilot who had just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything he had expected to see. Prayer. Colonel Harrison, Air Traffic Control responded. The demonstration was performed by Captain Williams in Aircraft Falcon 1. She should be available to meet with you after landing in post-flight. Procedures are completed. There was a moment of silence on the radio before Harrison responded. Captain Williams, did you say? That's affirmative, sir. Captain Zara Williams. Another pause, longer this time. Then, thank you for the information. We'll look forward to meeting Captain Williams. As Zara lined up for her landing approach, she could see vehicles already moving toward the area where she would park her aircraft. Word of the exceptional demonstration had clearly spread quickly, and it appeared that several people were eager to meet the pilot responsible for the display they had just witnessed. The Rafale touched down smoothly, and Zara taxied to her designated parking spot near the maintenance hangar. As she went through her post-flight shutdown procedures, she could see a small crowd gathering nearby, including several of the visiting dignitaries from the reception. Chief Petty Officer Martinez was waiting with her ground crew, a huge grin on his face. Captain, I don't know what you did up there, but everyone's talking about it. They're saying it was the best flying demonstration anyone's seen in years. Zara removed her helmet and climbed down from the cockpit, her flight suit still bearing the insignia and rank markers that had been questioned and dismissed just weeks earlier. But now, instead of skepticism and suspicion, she saw something different in the faces of the people waiting to meet her. She saw respect. Captain Zara Williams stood beside her Rafale fighter jet, still wearing her flight suit as the group of military officials approached. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the flight line, but the heat was nothing compared to the intensity of the moment she was about to face. Colonel Harrison led the group, his expression completely different from the confident dismissal he had shown during the morning briefing. Behind him walked Major Phillips, looking distinctly uncomfortable, along with several visiting dignitaries from allied nations. The German Air Force commander she had seen at the reception was there, as was an Italian general and a Canadian colonel. Captain Williams, Harrison said as he reached her, his voice carrying a tone of professional respect that hadn't been there before. I wanted to personally thank you for that exceptional demonstration. In 30 years of military aviation, I can honestly say I've never seen finer precision flying. Zara stood at attention, responding with the same military courtesy she had always maintained. Thank you, sir. I'm honored to represent our squadron and demonstrate the capabilities of the Rafale aircraft. The capabilities of the aircraft, yes, said the German commander, stepping forward. But more importantly, the exceptional skill of its pilot. Those maneuvers required not just training, but natural talent and years of experience. How long have you been flying the Rafale? 4 years on this aircraft type, sir, with 8 years total experience as a fighter pilot, Zara replied. The Italian general nodded approvingly. It shows. The precision of that barrel roll. The control during the knife-edge pass. These are not maneuvers. That can be performed by someone who doesn't have complete mastery of their aircraft. As the visiting officials continued to praise her performance, Zara noticed other people arriving at the scene. Lieutenant Rodriguez and Captain Thompson from her squadron had joined the group, along with Master Sergeant Collins from the equipment depot. Even the security guard from the officers' club had somehow made his way to the flight line. Captain Williams, the Canadian colonel said, we were just discussing with Colonel Harrison the importance of recognizing exceptional talent when we see it. Would you be available to participate in a joint training exercise we're planning for next month? We specifically requested the pilot who performed today's demonstration. I would be honored to participate, sir, Zara replied, maintaining her professional composure despite the satisfaction she felt at the recognition. Colonel Harrison cleared his throat, and Zara could see him struggling with something. Finally, he spoke again. Captain, I owe you an apology. This morning I made some comments that were inappropriate and unfounded. After witnessing your performance today, I realized that I allowed my preconceptions to cloud my judgment about military readiness and pilot qualifications. The apology hung in the air for a moment, and Zara could feel the eyes of everyone present watching her response. She had imagined this moment many times over the past few weeks, wondering what she would say if given the opportunity to respond to the discrimination she had faced. Sir, I appreciate your words, she said carefully. I believe that military excellence comes from dedication, training, and commitment to mission success, regardless of an individual's background. Today's demonstration was simply an example of what any well-trained pilot can accomplish when given the opportunity to perform. Her response was diplomatically perfect, acknowledging the apology without making Harrison look worse than necessary. But everyone present understood the deeper message. She had proven her point without having to argue it. Major Phillips stepped forward, looking like someone who desperately wanted to be anywhere else. Captain Williams, I've been reviewing your recent performance evaluations, and I think there may have been some miscommunications in the assessment process. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss your career development and address any concerns you might have about your evaluation scores. Zara almost smiled at the careful phrasing. Phillips was clearly realizing that the evaluation comments about attitude and team integration might be difficult to justify now that visiting dignitaries were specifically requesting to work with her. I would welcome that discussion, sir, she replied. I'm always interested in feedback that can help me improve my performance and better serve the mission. As the group of officials began to disperse, Chief Petty Officer Martinez approached with post-flight maintenance reports. Captain, the aircraft performed flawlessly during today's demonstration. All systems nominal, no issues to report. She's ready for whatever mission comes next. Excellent work as always, Chief, Zara said, reviewing the paperwork. I'll need her prepared for the joint exercise Colonel Harrison mentioned. It'll be my pleasure, Captain. After today's demonstration, I think word is going to spread pretty quickly about what this squadron is capable of. As the maintenance crew began their work on the aircraft, Zara noticed that Lieutenant Rodriguez had lingered behind while the other officers left. He approached with obvious nervousness, clearly wanting to say something but uncertain how to begin. Captain Williams, he finally said, I wanted to apologize for what happened at the officers' club a few weeks ago. I should have spoken up then, and I'm sorry I didn't. Zara studied his face, seeing genuine regret in his expression. Lieutenant, I appreciate that. What's important now is how we move forward as a team. Yes, ma'am. I just wanted you to know that a lot of us respect your skills and your service. Today's demonstration reminded everyone why you're one of the top pilots in the squadron. After Rodriguez left, Zara was approached by someone she hadn't expected to see, the security guard from the officers' club. He looked deeply uncomfortable as he waited for her to finish her post-flight procedures. "Captain Williams," he said when she turned to him, "I owe you an apology for what happened at the club. I was wrong, completely wrong, and I want you to know that I'm sorry." The apology was clearly difficult for him, and Zara could see that he was genuinely embarrassed about his behavior. "I appreciate you coming here to say that," she replied. "It takes character to admit when you've made a mistake." "I've learned something today," the guard continued. "I've been working around military personnel for 15 years, and I thought I knew what a real officer looked like. But I was judging by the wrong things. Today showed me that being a real officer is about what you can do, not what you look like." As the security guard walked away, Zara reflected on how much had changed in just a few hours. The same people who had questioned her qualifications and dismissed her capabilities were now seeking her out to offer apologies and request her participation in future missions. But perhaps the most significant change was in herself. For years, she had been trying to prove that she belonged, constantly working to earn acceptance and recognition from people who seemed determined to withhold it. Today, she had stopped trying to prove anything and had simply demonstrated who she was. 2 weeks later, Zara received notification that she had been selected for an advanced training program that would prepare her to become an instructor pilot. The program was highly competitive, typically reserved for officers with exceptional performance, records, and demonstrated leadership potential. The selection letter noted that her candidacy had been strongly endorsed by visiting international officers who had been impressed by her exceptional flying skills and professional demeanor. Colonel Harrison had provided a personal recommendation that praised her technical expertise and suggested she would be an invaluable addition to any training program. Major Phillips called her into his office to discuss the opportunity. His demeanor was completely different from their previous meetings, professional and respectful in a way that felt genuine rather than forced. "Captain Williams, this training program is a significant career opportunity," he said, reviewing her selection paperwork. "Instructor pilots are among the most respected officers in military aviation. It's a role that requires not just exceptional flying skills, but the ability to develop the next generation of pilots." "I'm honored to be selected, sir," Zara replied. "I look forward to the opportunity to share my experience with new pilots entering the program." "I have no doubt you'll excel in this role," Phillips said. "Your demonstration 2 weeks ago reminded all of us why we're proud to have you as part of this squadron." As Zara left Phillips's office, she passed the operations center, where flight schedules and assignments were posted. Her name was prominently displayed on the roster for next month's joint training exercise, listed as the primary demonstration pilot for international visitors. Walking past the officers' club on her way back to her quarters, Zara noticed that there was a new security guard at the entrance. The original guard had requested a transfer to a different position, according to base rumors. The club manager had also implemented new training procedures for all staff members regarding the treatment of military personnel, but the most satisfying change was the one Zara saw in herself when she looked in the mirror each morning. She no longer felt like she was trying to prove her worth to skeptical observers. She no longer worried about whether her presence was appreciated or whether her contributions would be recognized. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination wasn't argument or complaint, but simply excellence that could not be ignored or explained away. When people questioned whether she belonged in uniform, she had responded by showing them exactly what someone in uniform could accomplish. 6 months later, Instructor Captain Zara Williams stood in front of her first class of new pilot trainees. The group included officers from several different countries, all eager to learn advanced flying techniques and tactical applications. "Welcome to Advanced Fighter Pilot Training," she said, looking out at the diverse group of faces before her. "Over the next 12 weeks, you'll learn that excellence in military aviation comes from dedication, preparation, and the willingness to push beyond what you think you're capable of achieving." One of the trainees, a young woman who looked nervous about being one of only 2 female pilots in the class, raised her hand. "Ma'am, what's the most important thing for a new pilot to remember?" Zara smiled, thinking about her own journey and all the challenges that had brought her to this moment. The most important thing to remember is that you've earned your place here through merit and hard work. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Instead, show them what belonging looks like when you're behind the controls of a fighter jet. The lesson that had begun with humiliation at an officers' club had evolved into something much larger. A reminder that sometimes the best way to change minds isn't to argue with prejudice, but to demonstrate excellence so clearly that denial becomes impossible. And 30,000 feet above the ground, where skill mattered more than preconceptions and performance spoke louder than prejudice, Zara Williams had found the perfect platform for delivering that lesson.